This podcast is brought to you by Radio 786.
Welcome back to Community Pulse on Radio 786 and 100.4 FM. Now, we have kicked off a brand new series in social justice wherein we find our direction to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the best of women. And joining me in studio for part 2 of our discussion pertaining to Sayyidah Aasiyah alayhi is Sister Lillah A.S. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Lillah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you don't mind, I'm just going to make a quick dua for my own focus. Peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his companions and family. We know nothing except that which Allah teaches us. I pray that He leads our actions to be done for Him and His love sincerely, and that He purifies us for any other intention. I pray that He shows us truth as truth and guides us to it and away from falsehood, while making us people of the Quran with our hearts lightened by it. Ameen.
Ameen.
I said it in English because there's other people that might be listening in later, inshallah.
Inshallah. And how are you doing this morning, Sister Aasiyah?
Alhamdulillah.
Sister Aasiyah. Sister Lillah, how are you doing?
You're recognizing the rebellion in me, that's why.
You know, I wish that our listeners were privy to the discussions that we have off air. It's this series that we are engaging in is absolutely fascinating. The level at which we get to know these women, and the level at which, and Sister Lillah is guiding us through this, this journey as we get to know this women. And these women have their own personalities, which goes way beyond what we are taught and what the stories that we grow up with. So very quickly, for those of you who missed out last week, the recordings are available via the Radio 786 website. That's www.radio786.com. Last week, we explored who Sayyidah Aasiyah alayhi could possibly be in secular Egyptology. So there is evidence that sort of suggests that there is a tomb that could have been hers, and Sister Lillah took us through the sort of evidences which allowed her to come to this conclusion. We're not going to spend too much time on that. We had a dedicated discussion to it, and head on over to the website www.radio786.com to have a listen to that particular discussion. So we're moving on. We've established who Aasiyah could have been, historically, and today the focus of our conversation is what most of our listeners would sort of be familiar with. The content is something that they would be more familiar with, and today we look at how Aasiyah and Musa alayhi salam come to find each other and come to be in each other's company.
So yes, last week we talked about her in her lead position, and so it makes it that much more fascinating that she should just happen to be by the river when she found the baby Musa alayhi salam. But before we get into that, we have to look at why he was in that position. Yes. Because as everybody knows from the Quran, Pharoah had the babies executed. According to some scholars, it started off with him having a dream that there was a fire or something from Jerusalem that was attacking Egypt, but leaving the section of the Bani Israel. Then according to his quote-unquote spiritual counselors, they said that there would be a great leader that's going to rise up from Bani Israel and basically not take over, but ruin his position. So from there, instead of taking heed, instead of thinking, any decent person might think, okay, well, maybe I should stop oppressing Bani Israel. Maybe I should take this as a warning, and not be such an oppressive dictator. But instead, he just continues to be worse, which is typical.
Yeah.
So he then decides that the baby boys from Bani Israel should be executed. And of course, from that there's a variety of trauma for the families concerned. And what the Quran points out is that they were already oppressed. So they were already subjugated in such a way that they did not have the strength, they did not have the self-esteem to fight back. And so we find this parallel with abuse, whether it's nations, whether it's oppressive dictatorships, squashing down people, or whether it's, for example, in a marriage, when one spouse is attacking another spouse, like first they go at your self-esteem, it's first verbal abuse where they break you down, and then it becomes physical abuse. Because if you just walked into a marriage and your husband, for example, slapped you in the face straight away, you would respond with shock, like, what are you doing? And then immediately pack your bags and things. But what abusers tend to do, they tend to break you down first.
Yes.
So there was already this process of Bani Israel being subjugated to a variety of torment that just broke down their will as a people.
Yeah.
And that's when the soldiers came and killed their baby boys, they, instead of fighting back, they just did not have the strength or the energy to respond. So, and of course, we can reflect on that and look at other situations in our nation and throughout the world where people have been through similar situations. So it's also parallel to what governments do or what fascist systems do to kind of push families away from the male figure.
Yes.
You know, you see, for example, Planned Parenthood tends to focus on African American communities. And there's also this sort of attack on the nuclear family in a lot of societies where they're trying to get the mother and the children separated because then they're easier to manipulate and control because they tend to be more insecure.
Yes.
You understand? So that's part of the strategy. So we see that parallel throughout history and especially in today's day and age. So apparently, according to some scholars, now Bani Israel were actually a minority. So they didn't make up the majority of the lower class people. They were actually a minority, but the execution of the babies was significant enough to impact the economy in some way. If Pharaoh was Ramesses II, Ramesses II actually started his military work under his father at between the ages of 10 and 12.
Yes.
Okay. I think Nefertari married him by the time she was 16. But you see a lot of evidence of people starting work early. And this is a society where children don't go to school.
Yeah.
Because I often wondered, like, what was the economic impact? Because if Ramesses ruled for 60 years, that makes more sense. He was the pharaoh that ruled for the longest. So there you would see a long-term consequence of this action. Now, there was no school in those days. That meant that children were made to work. There was basically child labor. And so you would see an impact on the economy because it's not like it's not generations and generations of execution. You're seeing like within one generation, the execution is going to have an impact on the economy. So it was apparently suggested to Pharaoh that he shouldn't just execute all the baby boys, that he should do alternate years.
Okay.
Which of course makes absolutely no sense, but that's typical of fascist dictators who just don't think because they're just so arrogant that they don't need to think because intellectually it makes no sense. It's like, well, why don't you just let them all live, you know? So apparently Aaron was a bit older than Musa, so he survived because he was born in the year where they didn't execute the boys.
Yes.
Now, of course, Musa alayhi salam, he was born in the year where they did.
Yes.
Now, his mother then while she was pregnant, she was hiding the pregnancy for about 9 months, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about his mother, obviously, there was no C-sections back then. There was natural birth. Okay, so if you've given birth naturally, then you will know it's not that easy to keep quiet. Okay. But if you know how to give birth, if you know how to focus on your muscles, if you're trained in that way, she's had 2 children, so it's very likely that she knew how to give birth quietly. Okay, so if you know how to do it, you can do it quietly and you can do it successfully if you focus on your body. So it makes sense because if you look at Maryam alayhi salam, she wasn't so quiet. She panicked a bit more, but that was her first child.
Yes.
The mother of Musa alayhi salam, this was her 3rd child. So she was a bit calmer and a bit more focused, more in control, and she was able to give birth quietly without bringing attention to the soldiers. Then when Musa alayhi salam was born, the first thing she did was gave him the breast. That also kept him quiet and calm. And then she had this amazing inspiration to put him in the basket. And
send him down the river.
Yes. And it must have been a very, very heavily psychic, energetic type of experience to have that inspiration. And what I do relate to, especially as a woman, is her sense of panic afterwards. What have I done?
The child's out in the sun.
What did I just do? So that I can completely relate to. That is a perfectly understandable human reaction.
Yeah.
This baby floats down the river. The River Nile has so much significance if you think about it. It is the very reason why Pharoah has the civilization that he inherited.
Yes.
And it plays a massive role in their mythology. It plays a massive role in their economy. It plays a massive role in absolutely every aspect of their lives. So there's so much significance in the fact that Musa alayhi salam is floating down this specific river.
Yes.
And there's just so much to unpack regarding its significance and symbolism. And then, of course, who does he land up with, but Asiyah AS, which if you look at her role within context and the type of power and authority that she had, it's pretty amazing that somebody in her position should just be by the river
at that particular time.
Because it's like the Queen of England standing near Thames. Yeah. Just random, like I'm just going to stand here in the spot by the river because I just feel like being here right now. So that's pretty miraculous in itself that she was in that spot, because she was in such an incredibly high position, politically, religiously, in terms of her celebrity. So just like our political leaders, our high religious leaders, they're not accessible. Yeah. You can't just go up to the president or just go up to a celebrity. But she was all of these things in one package, and she just happened to be standing there. Yeah. Of course, she finds the baby, and there is this flood of maternal warmth. So whether she was barren or not, one thing is clear: this was not her biological child. But one thing is even more clear is that we women, through the rahim, through our wombs, and the hormones and the emotional energy that comes with it, we are such powerful instruments of love and mercy as a result. We channel so much rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to children. And so I love this idea of her not necessarily being able to have a child of her own, but finding this child and being this inspiration of maternal love, irrespective of whether you have children or not. And for you as a woman to see yourself as a maternal being. Yes. And that is a power in itself.
It is. It's interesting that you make, because I've heard that, Asiyah did have children, but that the children never survived infancy, which is why she took so quickly to Musa. Yes. And then, you introduced me to the narrative that there's this concept that she never or couldn't ever have children.
Yeah, because some scholars say that. So I need to do more research as to whether, but either way, I think for a woman, because there are a lot of women who feel that they're less than because they can't have children. Yeah. And either way, it is an inspiration to a woman to consider herself, even if you're single, you haven't been married yet, you haven't had children yet. I think it's important that we recognize ourselves as maternal beings and to recognize the power in that. If you look at how, for example, mothers, there have been more than one occasions where a woman has physically lifted a car off her child. Yes. Here we are trying to be like men, because we think the men are the ones who are powerful, and we want to be political like men, we want to be like all, savvy like men, but we don't understand that we have our own power in the rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is something that we need to embrace within ourselves, irrespective of whether we have biological children or not, irrespective of whether the child is ours or not. Yes. And unfortunately, we're missing a lot of opportunity to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by ignoring all these other children, especially in South Africa. There's a lot of children that get dumped, there's a lot of children that get neglected, and here we are with all this love, all this energy, all this power, and we're too busy trying to be something we're not.
Yeah, and it's sort of hardwired into us. You don't even have to try.
Yes.
Every little girl has played with dolls, and has played mom, who imitated her mother at some point. At some point in your life, you might feel like, oh, you don't actually like children, but the minute somebody in your family has a baby, you don't know what overcomes you, but you want to hold the child, you want to be involved to a certain extent, and that's just the nature of who we are as women.
Now that you mentioned that, I did write that down. It's in my notes about while I was dealing with the situation of the woman of Bani Israel having their babies taken from them and killed. Understandably, that would have been traumatic, but I just thought about, imagine being a little girl in that environment and growing up in, all little girls, no matter what position they are in society, have that fantasy of motherhood. Yes. Or most little girls do. And imagine being a little girl and having that inclination. I just think of a little girl today playing with her doll. Yeah. So that you can identify with the psychology of your average little girl. And imagine a little girl back then having that same emotional, psychological inclination, knowing that if you have a baby one day, that baby, if it's a boy, it's going to be taken from you and it's going to be killed. And what did that do to the girls back then? Yeah. What did that do to the females back then?
That was part of the psychological oppression that took place, and the tactic that was used by Pharaoh's people at the time.
Because it's what you're communicating to them is their worthlessness as people. Yeah. Like you're just dispensable.
Yeah. And nothing breaks a person down
crushing.
Like faster than telling them or dictating to them that they're worth nothing.
Yes.
And that's why we have so many people who suffer from mental health issues and depression, particularly. People would always, anybody who's been diagnosed with depression would tell you that they are sometimes crippled by the feelings of worthlessness.
Yes.
That wash over them, or that come over them.
And society still, to this day, in a variety of ways, breaks down the self-esteem of both men and women in a variety of ways. So there's definitely a link.
Definitely. And so Asiyah finds herself on this riverbank,
Miraculously, all places that she could be.
Random baby coming down the river, and she decides that this is my child.
Yes. and I love her, the oomph and the
authority,
the emphasis of you're not killing him, he's mine.
Yeah,
like forget it. Now, if you research the possibility of her being Nefertarian, like I said, if you look into her political position, religious, etc., it makes perfect sense why Pharoah couldn't kill him.
Yes,
because she really was that powerful, and otherwise he would have.
Yeah,
you see, but he just said, okay, fine, you can have this child. I believe because he had other wives, he had other concubines, he had about like 20 concubines, I think 9 wives, if memory serves me correct. If any one of them picked up the child, that child might have not necessarily survived. But because it was her who picked up the baby, and because she had all that leverage, she used that leverage. Again, that's a good moral for us as well. What leverage do we have that can benefit other people?
Yes.
You see, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to men, I have favored you, blessed you with strength, to be the protectors and the providers of the women and children. But we must also look at where we have strength, where we have power, where we have leverage, so that we can benefit those that are less fortunate as well.
Of course.
Inshallah.
Yes, inshallah.
So then, of course, one thing she doesn't have is milk, you know, because so the baby starts crying, as we know, and there's a hustle to find various women to breastfeed the baby, and the daughter, the sister of Musa alayhi salam,
who followed him,
So she either comes forward, or the soldiers find her and bring her forward, and she said, I know somebody who can assist you there. And then that's when Musa, now according to some scholars, she was about to shout out, she was about to burst, like, oh, my baby, and like basically give herself away. But then they got to her just in time and said, okay, can you feed this child? And so she put him to the breast. Now, from one scholar, I get the idea that Aaron was about maybe a year, 2 years older than Musa alayhi salam. Okay, that would make sense in the story, because then she's able to justify why she has milk.
Yes,
you see, because you're supposed to wait like preferably a 2 year period. You see, so she's able to justify why she has milk, and of course they asked her, like, well, how come he took to your breast? And she says, well, my milk is sweeter than other people's milk. For me as a mother, this is an issue that because breast is best, and I know Magboeba has spoken a lot about breast milk being better than formula. Unfortunately, the way the hospitals deal with you as a mother, and I've had this discussion with Magboeba, it's a pity that she's not joining us now, but I've said to her, like, as a mother, I've really struggled with this, with breastfeeding, because of the way the hospitals deal with you. It's like they're so forceful with you, they're so aggressive with you, it's so you can't relax. You need to relax when you breastfeed. And that environment is not conducive to that, especially with the way some of the staff handle you. And I always thought to myself, because I've had 2 children and I've struggled twice with both kids, and eventually I had to go to the formula because I just couldn't. But both times I thought to myself, but like, it would have been so nice if another woman was available to do that. And it was such a common thing in the old days. We don't have that at all anymore. We only have, it's like you either feed your own child or it's formula. Those are your only options.
And there's the human milk banking option as well, but again, it's coming through an artificial teat for the for the child. There's no human connection when it comes to that. And it's become so heavily phased out. That it's weird to people, like, to even consider letting somebody else breastfeed your baby. But it was so common in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and going all the way back to ancient Egypt in the time of Musa alayhi salam. But unfortunately, we don't have that option anymore. So I know that to a certain extent, siblings, sisters would, if they had their children around the same time. I personally know of few families where sisters had their children around the same time, and they would breastfeed each other's children. Even in my own generation, I actually have friends who are sisters who had kids around the same age, who actually, breastfed each other's children. So I think that it does happen. It's just not as commonly,
it's not as common.
It's not, put out there that this is a practice, and it's more something that you see in the Muslim community, because we understand the value of this of the milk mother, and the value of ensuring that the child gets exactly what it is that they need.
Yeah, I think the problems with breastfeeding in the Western community is also linked. It's a part of a much bigger problem of women being left alone with their babies and not getting any support, and that's why you also see a lot of postnatal depression as well. Because, obviously, if you're going to be so mentally exhausted, your hormones will change, you're mentally exhausted, there's so many things happening, it's understandable that you're going to break down, especially if you don't get support.
What I do find fascinating about this particular part of the story is that, of course, because Asiyah insists that that she's keeping this child, Pharoah, of course, goes out of his way and instructs that all the women who have had children should come. So you have all of these women who are lactating and who are possible candidates to be a milk mother, but Musa, any other child would have latched to any mother who had a supply available, but Musa, as this prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, only latches to his own mother, and I think that in itself is a fascinating aspect. Because
as far as I know, it's not as if if you latch to one woman, you can't latch to another woman and another. It's not like that at all.
It's about a hungry child will take food where they get it.
Exactly. So that was just a miraculous occurrence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired the baby to latch when you're supposed to his mom. All right. Lillah, let's very quickly take a break, and when we get back, we'll continue this discussion regarding the relationship between Lady Aasiyah salam as well as Musa, this prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what exactly this relationship between the two of them means for this rule of Pharoah. Do stay tuned to Radio 786 on 100.4 FM. In today's edition of Social Justice, I am joined in studio by Sister M.A.Heldzingen, and we are finding our direction to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the best of women. Do stay tuned to Radio 786 on 100.4 FM.